Hello, this is Lizzie,
And I'm May,
and we are Mayhem Mamas.
where we talk about whatever we want because this is our channel.
And it is, and we do. Welcome back, everybody, to our episode 10 of Trauma Tuesday.
Woohoo, the Big 10, the 10.
Yeah, I know, right? We're just steady going. um,
Yay.
so, we left off last week with May and I talking about our finding out we're pregnant, our pregnancy, our birth, and how alike but different things were. And so we had said that this week that we would be talking about my personal story with my daughter. And then if you join in with us next week, we'll be talking about May's personal journey with her daughter.
Right.
But we want to go ahead and issue a trigger warning for this episode because it will contain some graphic and possibly disturbing pieces of information that might upset someone. So just be aware of that.
Right.
So I we were thinking about names for this episode, and I was like, well, everybody always says, "Oh, my little itty bitty baby, she was so tiny." Well, my itty bitty baby weighed 9 pounds and 1.5 ounces. And she came out like a several month old. She was long. She was 23 and 3/4 inches long. And
Mm-mm.
as I had said prior, when I left off before, um, she was in the NIC unit and we were there for a few days. And then they decided that they were going to let us go home. We were still awaiting the results to come back on some testing that we had out on her suspected diagnosis of congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And it was funny because I had my mother bring in an outfit for her to wear home because it's usually a big thing of what your baby wears home from the hospital
Right.
kind of thing. And of course this situation was a little different for me because of the how she was born and how she appeared and those kinds of things. And so the outfit that I had decided to put her in to bring home, I sent it down to the NIC unit because I was still in the hospital myself. They kept me, and we were going to go home together that day. They called up from the NIC nursery and said, do you by chance have any other clothes? My child could not wear newborn clothes.
Oh.
She could not wear, yes, and she could not wear newborn diapers
Oh.
because she was so long.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even though she weighed over 9 pounds, she was not a chunky baby because she was so long.
Right.
She was kind of a skinny baby and she looked much smaller than you would think a 9-pound baby would look, but she was long. And so
Wow.
I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, who doesn't wear newborn clothes? Well, my child.
Right.
Like I
Right.
said, she came out a couple of months old. That's what I like to
Right.
tell people. She was awfully cozy in there and decided that once she got used to it, she just kind of wanted to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
So the day that we left to come home, um, we didn't have the CAH diagnosis, but it was a suspected diagnosis. And so we were waiting testing. But there are several other things that we found out during her first few days of life, other things that were going on with her. The first thing I kind of always like to talk about is the things that were immediately recognizable, that were physical, that people could see when they came up to see your baby. The first thing they're going to see as they're swaddled is the
Mm-hmm.
face. Well, my
Yeah.
daughter was born with a cleft lip. um, the palate was only notched. So a lot of times when you have babies that present with this, their palate, which is the roof of the mouth,
Mhm.
will be gone, and it's just a hole up into the sinus cavity, so there's nothing there.
Oh, my stars.
Yes, and so, um
And then will you explain to people who don't know what a cleft lip is? I know what it's like, what it is,
right, a
but
cleft lip is basically where, and I'm gonna use it in terms that this is how I would describe it myself personally talking, I'm not a doctor. It looks like there's a
what?
tear in the lip.
Mhm.
So you have a space. It can be bilateral, which is both sides, or it can be one side or the other. My
Mhm.
daughter's was one side, and basically it just looks like someone had taken scissors and cut her lip, and there was a
Right.
gap in between. It really went from nostril, like if you're looking at your right side and you have your round nostril on that side of your nose, it went like from this nostril to the other nostril, straight down. So there
Right.
was basically a hole that went up into her nose area.
Right.
Um, her notch was on the same side, which was a blessing because a lot of times when obviously if you have no palate, you have to have s- m- multiple surgeries to repair the palate. For my child, um, the cleft lip repair was the plastic surgery of the actual lip, kind of reconstructing a little bit her nose and nasal area, because you can't just like sew them up and it looks perfect kind of thing.
Right.
So, and she had multiple surgeries for that. Her notch ended up not being something that required a lot of extra surgeries for. But what I can say is, and anyone that has a child that's born with this condition, you know that it leads to other things. One is you can have malformed sinus cavities, um, which my daughter did. It causes lots of problems with, sinus infections all the time, and so later on down the road, my daughter had multiple sinus reconstruction surgeries, adenoids removed, all that kind of basic stuff, but
Mhm.
reconstructive surgery on her sinuses.
Mm.
The other thing it leads to is constant ear infections. And so, had, I think she was only like a month old when she had her first ear infection, and it was a constant thing. It happened
Mhm.
over and over and over and over again. She was on maintenance antibiotics for it. That didn't help. And so, had a lifetime of tubes, they'd fall out, and tube surgery again. So,
Right.
multiple surgeries for tubes. The other thing is a cleft lip can cause eating issues. So you can't just put a bottle in their mouth and think they're going to be able to suck it because you've got
Right.
this big gap up here where air comes out.
Right.
So for her, she had to use a special nipple for her bottle, and I had to support her chin from the bottom to put like pressure to help her with that, uh, to give her a little more suction. And so feeding was obviously a longer process than with, a child that didn't have a doesn't have a cleft lip, and
Mhm.
it took longer, it was just more in depth, um, trying to get her familiar with trying to do that because it's kind of frustrating. I always like to give analogy of this. Let's say you go to, McDonald's, and they have those big straws.
Right.
Okay, it'd be like if you get a cut in the side of your straw and you go
Mhm.
to suck up your Coke and nothing's coming up.
Mhm.
It's kind of the same thing. You lose that seal of suction.
Right.
So obviously, measuring and writing down the amounts of liquid that she's consuming is a big deal because you don't want to malnourish your child because you don't realize she's really not eating what she should be eating.
Right.
And when you have a newborn, you especially a newborn that has lots of problems, you're focused on so many other things that sometimes that can fall to the wayside, and sometimes that affects they lose more, body weight initially than your average child would.
Right.
The
Right.
other thing the cleft lip is responsible for is dental issues, which makes sense because of the palate.
Right.
Um, even if there's not um, palate missing, like I said, had a notch, which was just a small area of palate issue. She had multiple teeth, and so down the road, that was big issues with when she started getting getting teeth in, losing teeth. Now, my daughter had a tooth coming in when she was born.
Wow.
Um, and so later down the road, she had multiple oral surgeries due to having to um, cut out multiple teeth, that kind of thing.
So let me
Um,
ask you this. When they
Mhm.
did the lip and the palate and the teeth, was that something they were able to do at one time, or was that
No,
each individual?
it was different surgeries. Yes. Typically, l- for my daughter's actual cleft lip repair,
Uh-huh.
it consisted of two different surgeries. Then her surgeries that were about her teeth, oral type things inside her mouth were
Uh-huh.
separate surgeries down like down the road, different
Okay.
surgeries here and there, but it was
Yeah.
extensive and there were a lot.
Right.
Um, and like I said, luckily didn't have the missing palate inside up top, so that
Mhm.
can add, you know, even more surgeries on top of that if that were to happen.
Right. Right.
Um, and so those were kind of the things that she had problems and issues with that went along with the cleft lip. Obviously, that's the first thing everyone sees, and so everyone stares, everyone makes
Right.
comments. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look normal. We're a society about if things don't look a certain way, you're different and what's wrong.
Right.
Um, you get used to it pretty quickly. Um, and then we'd go to appointments at the doctor, which was the cranial facial clinic with Children's Hospital is in Washington, D.C., is who we dealt with in the beginning. And they were wonderful, but you get in there and then you think, oh my, this is nothing compared to, not to minimize what it was because it was big, but not compared to things
Oh,
other people could. Right,
absolutely.
exactly.
I fully understand what you're saying. I
Mhm.
I I understand. I've had that same emotion, that same, yeah, I
Yeah.
understand exactly what you're
Mhm.
saying.
So you always let me speak for myself. I always tried to stay really positive. I was overwhelmed with so many things, and I'll continue on with the other things that she had. But I was 3 months from my 25th birthday when I had my child, and so I mean, honestly, I was still a child, really,
Uh-huh.
myself,
Right.
and I always tried to stay really positive with her. Um, of course, I was upset, and I mean, in some ways, it's devastating because we as a society don't talk about how how difficult it is to have a healthy child. We just
Right.
assume that
Right.
everybody's going to have a great pregnancy, a nice delivery, and they're going to have a
Absolutely.
big, a healthy, just amazing baby. And
Right.
unfortunately, that's not what happens sometimes. And
Right.
actually, it's easier to have a baby that has problems than it is to have a healthy baby.
Well, and I
So,
think now it's even worse because you have these family channels on YouTube, and then you have social media where you can make your family look any way you want to.
right, right,
So I think it's worse now.
for sure, for sure it is. Um, so I never in a million years thought that anything would be wrong with my child.
Absolutely.
Like, you just don't think about that. And
Right.
it's not like I have a history in my family of major problems or, anything like that. So
Right.
I just, I went through all the birthing classes and all those prep classes that you go through. And I mean, we didn't even touch on the subject of what ifs. That just
Right.
wasn't discussed. And I'll
Right.
tell you another thing that was even just barely touched on was forceps delivery, and my birth was a forceps delivery birth, and I had no clue.
Mhm.
Like, you go to Lamaze and those things, and you don't even talk about, well, what if this doesn't happen and you have to have a C-section, or what if this doesn't happen and you have to have a forceps delivery, or the extraction cup, that fits on top of the head. Those
Mhm.
things weren't talked about. So it
Right.
doesn't prepare you for anything. So when it does happen, it's like such a shock that you almost don't even know how to react.
Well, yeah, and really, I think that maybe I don't know about classes now, but maybe if you are out there and you're listening and you do wellness, OBGYN or birthing classes or whatever, maybe just fit a 2 second, 10 second, 30 second section in on, hey, if something does happen, here are some other options that may possibly happen, and these forceps may come in or this suction thing may come in. So that way when you see these things, you don't aren't scared, stressed, worried,
Right,
concerned,
right. Because
but
one of
you know.
exactly, one of the things I think for me, just in any situation, is I want to know. I
Right.
don't wanna be caught off guard and put in a situation where I don't know what's happening. I
Right.
mean, even if you go into the emergency room and you broke your arm or your leg, they kinda walked you through that situation. This is what's
Mhm.
gonna happen next, and this is what we're gonna do. I
Right.
mean, why can't it be like that in this situation? So
Right.
that it's gonna be okay, there's gonna be people there, you're gonna get some support, they're gonna explain what's going on. Now, I think things are much better today than they were 29 years ago when I had my child.
I don't know about that.
Um, I mean, I don't know that that's the case. I would
I
hope
mean, I
that it
I'm just
is.
saying that from 9 years ago,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um,
but
one of the biggest things too with the cleft lip situation is nobody even came in and talked to me about it.
right.
Like, they didn't like, the doctor didn't come in, they didn't send, a pediatric, plastic surgeon in to say, "Hey, don't worry about this. This is no big deal.
Right.
We can fix this. This is just the least of your worries. Don't worry about it." But there
Right.
again, it's that physical thing, so it's one of the first things you see.
Right.
No, nobody came in, nobody talked to me, nobody reassured me, and
Uh-huh.
believe me, it was the bottom of the barrel. Things got much worse the more I learned of what was going on with her. And
But
so
you
it was
didn't know.
just, but I didn't know that. All I knew
Right.
that it was the physical thing.
Right.
And so it got pushed to the bottom of the barrel. So the next thing I'm learning is that my child was born with kidney reflux. Basically what that is that in a normal case, what that is, it's where your urine flows backwards from the bladder to one or both of the ureters, and sometimes it flows to the kidneys. So basically, what's going on is it's not functioning properly, and
Mhm.
so thus leads to infections, and
Right.
you can imagine. So surgery is an option to repair. They usually start them on for first line of treatment. They usually start them on maintenance antibiotics. And if for people that don't know what maintenance antibiotics are, because you're going to hear that a lot from me, it's basically what it is it's a daily dose that you take to try to get ahead of the infection so that it doesn't become a problem.
Wow.
Um, the other thing is, sometimes they have intermittent catheterizations done to kind of be sure you're clearing all of that
Mm.
urine out of the bladder, and then
Right.
also bladder muscle meds can be used. So
Ugh.
lots of medicines, catheterizations, and then eventually, if need be, um, repair.
Right.
Um, then the next thing they tell me is that she has a ventricular septal defect. So anytime you hear, and of course, me, I didn't know a lot about any of this stuff. And so the first thing you say, well, what is that?
Right.
And then they say, well, it's a congenital condition, which means present at birth. That's congenital, just means that present at birth. Um, a heart issue. Well, then you hear heart and you're like, "Oh my gosh,"
Yeah.
the first thing you want to think is, "So great, my baby's not going to live because she's
Right.
got a heart problem." Basically, what it is, and they a lot of times will call it a hole in the heart, but the it forms in the baby when this is still in the womb,
Right.
when the septum doesn't completely seal off. And so what happens is that slowly over time it overworks your heart. So basically what's going on is blood from the high pressure ventricle, right ventricle, squirts blood into the lower pressure right ventricle. So
Mm.
you're working overtime. Your heart's working overtime to get this done. And
Right.
so it can cause an enlarged heart, heart failure, those types of things down the road.
Right.
So I was just so overwhelmed because they kept coming in and telling me all these things. A lot of times babies will eventually, as they grow, that will seal off. Um, but sometimes you do have to have surgery for it. My
Right.
daughter sometimes it's one hole and sometimes it's multiple. My
Oh.
daughter had 3 holes in her heart. And so this was kind of like a more severe case of it. And at the moment, she's got all these other issues. And even though this is something that has to be addressed and taken care of it at some point, we're still trying to figure out everything else that's going on with her. And it just seems to just it was the gift that kept on giving, if you know what I mean.
Right. Right.
So, and mind you, we're still waiting for results on
This,
the
yeah.
CAH.
Right.
Uh, then the next thing we realized pretty early on is that she had gastroesophageal reflux. Now, it in an infant, it's a little bit different than like we know GERD,
Mhm.
which is gastroesophageal reflux disease.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times reflex in a baby can eventually turn to that as an adult, but basically it's the same thing, it's the same concept. The contents that are in your stomach leak backwards from the stomach up into the esophagus. So
Mhm.
then you get that fluid in your throat or in your
Mhm.
mouth like you've thrown
The
up, but you're
acid,
not
yeah.
really right, the acid. You know how that burns your throat, burns
Mhm.
your esophagus, burns your stomach. So here you've got this little tiny baby that's every time they eat is just miserable and even after because of all this burning and discomfort.
Correct.
So with my daughter, there's several things. They can put them on medicines, a lot of medicines that are kind of similar to what adults would take, 3 or 4 different things on 4 different things. Um, and then they give you these suggestions of like I had to elevate her baby bed, her crib
Mhm.
mattress.
Mhm.
I never laid her in a down position, that makes it worse.
Yep.
She was what I call a power puker,
Yep.
and so she could be on my lap and hit the wall 10 feet away, it was just a power surge, and so it makes them kind of, fussy, and they hurt,
Yeah.
and they cry with
Fussy is not the right word.
right,
It makes
um
them demons from hell. Let's be honest.
Funny. No, well, she woke up about every 15 or 20 minutes all
Yep.
night long because she would have these, like you would do if you're familiar with heartburn and
Uh-huh.
reflux.
Yeah.
And so that's when she was first born with the heart monitor and the reflux that really set my sleep pattern for waking up every 15 or 20 minutes all night long. And so
Mhm.
unfortunately, here I am much later in life and I'm still on that sleep pattern. Thank you, my child. Thank you.
Yes. Mama
Um,
loves you, baby.
yes. Um, and then it also can cause lots of coughing,
Mhm.
difficulties in breathing, irritability, like we talked about with the eating.
Mhm.
But she would cough because her little throat was so irritated.
Mhm.
And she would get choked on
Mhm.
it, and struggle
Right.
some. And so in the beginning, this leads to our next diagnosis, but in the beginning, that's what I was attributing all of her coughing and her troubles breathing. I was associating that with this.
Right.
But then when she was about 4 months old, we realized that she had asthma. And
Okay.
so she was a couple of months old and she had RSV. We were in and out of the hospital all the time, all the time, all the time. And even if she wasn't actually in the hospital, we were in and out of the hospital because of all
Right.
the testings and the blood work and everything that she had to do on a weekly basis. And so, you know, what better place to catch that than at the hospital? And so then, like I
Yeah.
said, they did testings and thing, and she had asthma. So she was on nebulizer treatments, ever so many hours. She was on, uh, asthma medicines, allergy medicines, all those kinds of things to try to help and deal with her asthma.
Mm.
Um, and then the big kicker, um, she I take her home and we get the results back that yes, she does have congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And so she had gone into an episode of this. I guess I should back up a little bit and tell you a little more about what that truly is.
Okay, let me ask you this question real quick.
Mhm,
When you got the results of the CAH, were so you knew like the doctor was like, "Hey, I'm pretty certain that's what this is, but I'm sending this off to be certain, like
mhm.
100%." Were you already preparing yourself that
Yes.
okay, so when they
Yes.
got the results and they said, "Okay, it is definitely this," you had already got your mindset wrapped around, and so you weren't as like, oh my gosh, shocked about it, but you still, I'm sure, came to terms with like, well, son of a gun, it's now, I don't know, there's something about it that makes it definitive that
Right. I
it still have to deal with it.
I had a lot of emotions. You know, remember, this was back in the early 90s,
Hmm.
and we didn't have computer. We couldn't
Right.
Google,
Right.
those types of ways to find out information. And so
Right.
I had gone to the library and I had checked out books, which there weren't that much information. I was really having to look at medical journals and medical
Right.
books to try to figure out and educate myself about what this was and what it really meant. I
Right.
mean, the doctors can say, "Oh, this is what it is," but it's not telling you really about this and what's going to happen and what it means. And so I'd already started educating myself about it,
Hmm.
but I was still in hopes that that wasn't the case. And
Right.
so when I did hear that, I was I was shocked to a degree. I was relieved to a degree that at least I knew what it was.
Right.
Um, and then I was almost, I don't want to use the word empowered because I don't know that doesn't really say what I was feeling either, but I just knew that this was not going to get in the way. This diagnosis was not going to get in the way of my child doing and being what she wanted to be. I
Okay.
wasn't going to allow that to happen. And so from that day forward, I just tried to be positive about it with her and with everyone else
Hmm.
and to educate myself.
Right.
That was my sole goal was to do those things. And so basically it's CAH is a genetic condition. It affects the hormone production in the adrenal gland. And so basically what we do is with the medicines that we give her to help her live and survive and thrive, we regulate her adrenal gland with medicines. So we're
Okay.
basically making it work because her body doesn't produce the hormones that she needs to make that happen.
Right.
So there's two forms of this. There's a classic form and there's a non-classic form. So in other words, there's a severe form and a little bit milder form. My daughter has the severe form, which
Well,
means that
of course.
yes, that she is a salt waster. And basically what that means is that her body doesn't maintain salt or really manufacture enough salt for her to, just stay hydrated, to have her body function properly. Um, she loses a large amount of the salt, the sodium in her body out through her urine. So
Okay.
basically, that's where the wasting comes into. Whatever we give in, she puts out.
Mhm.
So not only are we using the drugs to regulate and help with her hormone manufacturing process, we're also giving her meds to try to help her retain and not waste her salt.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So what happens is that anytime she gets physically ill, sick, temperatures,
Mhm.
diarrhea, throwing up, anytime she has extremely stressful situations, her body doesn't make those hormones that kicks into overdrive and says, "Okay, I'm going to compensate for this and you're going to be fine." Her body doesn't do that. So, in those cases, we have to adjust her medicines. Sometimes it's a double the dosing each time, and this is medicines that she takes multiple times a day. It's not just
Right.
once a day. Um, and sometimes we triple her medications. Sometimes if she has diarrhea or she has vomiting, she can't take oral medicine. She has to have injections.
Mm.
It's a process of. So it's kind of learning how to regulate her body, knowing the signs of what might be coming, um, and try to make up for what she's not getting so that if she gets the flu and she's super sick with that, it doesn't lead to an adrenal crisis.
Right. Right.
And, then that's extremely serious and life threatening.
Correct.
Usually when they're born with the ambiguous genitalia, like we discussed in the last program, there's usually always a concern that it may be CAH. And so typically those kids are diagnosed relatively quickly. Um, But some of the symptoms that kinda go along with that is dehydration, and they're not feeding well, um, diarrhea, vomiting, heart rate problems, heart rhythm problems, low blood pressure, low blood glucose, weight
Right.
loss, and then eventually, if something happens and they get really sick and they go into adrenal crisis, what happens is their body goes into shock, and
Mm.
that's when, their brain and organs aren't getting enough, and with the salt wasting, it'll lead to confusion and irritability and rapid heart, and eventually it can lead to coma.
Gosh.
Yes. So it can get really, really serious really,
Really
really
quick.
fast.
Yeah.
Right. And so you just think about the things that your baby would do that could cause them to lose extra salt, and she can't afford to lose anything. We need her to keep everything we're giving to her. So crying,
Mm. Right.
sweating,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
any of those types of things, or just a little injury
Right.
is life threatening for her.
Right. Being a baby was detrimental to her because babies
Right.
just, I mean, my child, my daughter just cried. I think the
Uh huh.
first year of her life.
Uh huh.
My
Yeah.
son, not so much, but my daughter,
Right. And they didn't want me to let her cry.
yeah.
And I was adding, not only were we giving her all these medicines to regulate and to help maintain and to help control and to not to lose, I was having to add salt to every single bottle that she was given.
Which can't be good tasting.
No, but I can tell you what, as a baby, if you start that, it
She
just
doesn't know any
becomes like
different.
anything else. She doesn't know any different. And so I was encouraged. She could eat as much salt as she wanted to. Like she was a huge pickle eater, salty snacks. She was encouraged.
Ugh.
And so later on in life, when we'd go to a restaurant, she would add the salt on, and people just look at me like, you shouldn't let your kid
Yeah.
but for her, it doesn't matter. It's
Right.
not on top of. She doesn't
Right.
make that. So, um, anyway, so then
And you
later on,
should mind your own business, table
right,
3.
exactly. Here's another one where you can't believe what people actually feel like they have the right to say
Mhm.
to other people, not even knowing the situation. Um,
Yeah.
once you can get her CAH under control. When she was younger, it was a lot more difficult. For one, when she was a baby, she couldn't tell me things. And
Right.
so I got very, very in tune with her body, the way that she looked, her coloring, um, her mouth, her lips, were they dry, the temples of her heads, whether they were kind of a little more moon shaped or if they looked more contoured. All of those things were tips to me
Mhm.
of when my daughter wasn't doing as well, and I got to the point where I could almost tell you when her lab works were going to come back good or when they were going to come back bad.
Right.
Lab work was like that was just part of our routine. It
Right.
was a daily, weekly, for years thing that had to happen,
Yep.
which is bad in itself because then everything gets scarred up. They can't get blood,
Right.
and what happens when you go to the doctor and you're dehydrated?
Oh, yeah.
They can't find a vein. Well, with
Yeah.
her, if her meters aren't squared, so to speak, um, she's dry, so
Mhm.
it makes sense you're not going to have able to get a vein very well. And so that was always very traumatic for us, the blood draw and the all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but then once she got a little older and could talk and she could tell me things, it did get a little easier. And then once she got to be, a teenager and then of course as an adult, um, then she can tell when she's having problems or it just becomes so much easier. But we she played sports just like everybody else, and we just uh did the things that we needed to do to make that possible for her because I wanted her to have as normal a life as possible.
Absolutely.
um Making sure that she got the right doses of her medicine is really important though, because that affected her growth. Typically people that have CAH in the beginning, they have or as a baby, and she was a perfect example of that coming out of the womb, they have rapid growth. They're usually higher on the charts as far as height and weight and those types of things when they're littler. They
Mhm.
go into puberty sooner.
Right.
Sometimes they have a deeper voice. They're always very well, their muscle tone is always like, she always looked like a little beefed up baby, because she always had this muscle tone because they're on massive amounts of steroids all the time.
Right.
Even though it's not like you and I being on them, uh,
Yeah.
it is, it does kind of go along and add with that. But um, they sometimes will have severe acne and all these different things
Right.
that go along. And so there's lots of clues and kind of things that you can keep an eye on that will kind of give you ideas of whether or not her medicines are kind of where they need to be or where they're not. But it's definitely a fine science.
Right.
Um, she had, and I don't even, I was, before I was going to do this show, I had spoke to her about, me talking about this. And yeah, I'm just trying to remember how many surgeries she what the number was. We used to
Mhm.
keep track of them. Like, oh, here's surgery number, whatever. I
Mhm.
don't remember, but it's in the high 20s.
Mm.
So just the trauma that goes along with all of that. And I I always constantly worried, constantly stressed out. Um, you know, I lived in such fear because I didn't think she was going to live the first couple of years. And so just living in that fear of not knowing, is my baby going to live or die? And is this going to be the last time I hold her?
Absolutely.
Right. So there's just so much stress that goes along with that. But as life goes on and life moved by, the years, the surgeries, we got her cleft lip done. We got all these other things repaired, fixed. Um, and then we just kind of we fell into routine of medicines and just trying to live life. I have never had another child. She was my only one, and I don't know what it would even feel like to have a kid that didn't have all those problems. Like, I can't imagine what that must be. I feel like I missed out on some things because of the hospitals and because of the testing and because of the surgeries. But then there's some ways I feel like other people have missed out because
Left.
after we got some of those surgeries completed, then, we could kind of breathe a little easier.
Right.
But I don't even know what it would be like to have a child that didn't have a lot of problems.
Right.
I don't
Right.
know what that experience would be like.
Right.
Sometimes I felt like I've missed out on a lot of things because we were in and out of the hospital and in and out of testing and all those things. But in some ways I feel like everyone else has missed out because I did get so much uninterrupted quality time with her
Uh-huh.
because of her problems that I just feel like my bond with her has just been so extremely close
Mhm.
that I don't know that you could share that type of bond with another child.
Absolutely
Does
not.
that make does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I fully understand what you mean. Um, I also know with our situation too, we have had people in our lives that I am so blessed to have in our lives that I
Absolutely.
wouldn't have in my life if I didn't have my child,
Yes.
if that makes sense.
Oh, I agree totally. I can tell you, um, you know, most of life on a regular basis. We saw an endocrinologist, a plastic surgeon, cardiologist, a urologist, a gastroenterologist, a pulmonologist, a
Mhm.
geneticist, a psychologist, ear, nose, and throat doctor. We saw
Mhm.
all of these doctors on regular basis. I'm telling you, her endocrinology team over the years have been family.
Mhm.
Like they are like family to us.
Right.
Um, because you see them so frequently and they have such a major job and role in your child's well-being and growth, and I mean frankly in their survival,
Mhm.
that they just become such important people in your life. And I remember, and I kind of laugh about this, when my daughter went off to college. She chose to go to school out of state, actually quite a ways away from where I live. And Uh, she was a young graduate, and so she was younger when she went off, but it's funny because she would come back on her breaks and go see her endocrinologist at Children's Hospital, which is a
Uh-huh.
pediatric endocrinologist, and, she saw her until
Right.
Lacey got her degree.
Aw.
And that just goes to show, what a bond that you can
Mhm.
have with your medical team. Now, that's
Mhm.
not to say that I haven't had a doctor here and there that have just been
Oh, absolutely.
total, just messed up.
Yeah.
But I have to say, in general, most of the doctors, and we've had a lot of them at a lot of different locations and a lot of different states over the years, that have just been wonderful. I cannot say more positive things about Children's Hospital in general. I
Right.
know some people, have had issues or whatever, and you can have that anywhere. But I can tell
Yeah.
you, as someone who lived there for 18 years,
Mhm.
uh, There's just some wonderful, fabulous nurses, doctors, and staff that work for that institution, and I thank them for that.
So let me ask you some questions if you don't care, if you don't
Sure.
mind. So you said that your daughter's condition is a genetic condition. So did she have
Yes.
genetic testing, and did
Oh,
you do
yes.
genetic testing too and
Okay,
find
yes.
all?
Yes. So, one of the first things that they did once that we did I mean, they were gonna send us to genetic counseling even if did not have CAH.
Mhm.
Um, they were going to send us anyway because of the other things. And so when we went, my daughter was only a few weeks old.
Mhm.
And I think they were desperately trying to figure out the, if this was a syndrome of some sort
Right.
because she had so many things going on.
Right.
So what we did find out was no, it was not a syndrome.
Right.
These were all separate issues.
Mhm.
Some of them were genetic, some of them weren't.
Right.
Um, in order to be in order to have the disease CAH, you have to have your mom and your dad carriers of the specific gene.
Oh, wow.
So, mom could be married previous and have a child with someone else and not have CAH.
Mhm.
But then get remarried to a man over here that also carries the gene, every child that they have will have CAH
Wow.
because it takes the mom and the dad both as the carrier to produce the disease. Now, once you know that you have it,
Right.
obviously I got it from my mom or my dad. They both didn't carry it, or else one of us kids would have had it.
Right.
So I got it from either my mom or my dad. And then let's say my mom was the carrier, then
Mhm.
she got it from either her mom or her dad because they didn't have any children that were affected with it. And
Right.
then they got it from either their mom or their so it's carried down like that. And that's why there's so many uh that's why it's not a huge thing is because it's
Mhm.
more rare.
Right.
Um now, what I do know is that now they've made such strides in the research with it
Mhm.
that they have treatment. Now, it's not a cure, but say you are a parent of a child that is living with a disease and you choose to have another child, you
Mhm.
can have that child treated in utero
Oh,
so that when they're born, they won't at least they won't be born with the ambiguous genitalia. They
well,
will grow at a normal rate and they will develop at a normal rate
right.
in the womb because they can treat through there.
Yeah.
It's a genetic, it's a blood stick draw test that can tell you whether you have the gene or you do not.
Mhm.
Um, so they've made that easier. My daughter is choosing not to have children because one of the biggest reasons is because she would not ever want to put her child through what she's had to go through.
Right. Right. Well, and I don't yeah, I can see that.
Uh-huh.
I can see that.
Yes.
So, and then another question I had, with the CAH, it has rapid heartbeat and issues with the heart as well, but she also had a three holes in her heart.
Right.
So I know that some conditions and some issues have symptoms of, how am I trying to say? Did Was it hard for them to diagnose certain things because of like what she had with CAH had certain symptoms, and so it was harder for them to find other things because it's like, oh, well, that's just a symptom of CAH, when actually it was caused by something else. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes,
What
I
I'm
understand
asking?
what you're
Okay.
saying. Yes, I do. No, I don't think that was the case because I can tell you she was in the hospital for so many days before we got those test results back
Mhm.
that they weren't. taking that into consideration because they didn't know if she had that or not.
Right.
So when we found out all these other things, they were found individually.
Okay, so they basically just looked at her from head to toe
Yes,
and didn't take any symptoms
right.
into okay. Well, that's
No.
good. That's a
No,
huge
and
positive.
obviously, one of the things like rapid heart rate, um, the difference between the CAH and like her VSD, I mean, yeah, is that when you get a stethoscope and put it on your heart, you're going to be able to hear that there's a hole in the heart.
Okay.
It makes a different sound. Whereas
Right.
if it were just a CAH, you aren't going to hear any of that.
Okay. Okay.
So they detected that most likely as soon as she came out of the womb and they put the stethoscope on her chest. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Uh-huh.
They
Absolutely.
suspected, "Oh, wow, hear that
Okay.
sound," because it makes a whooshing sound.
Okay.
You're hearing it go in and out of the hole. So
Gotcha.
it makes a whoosh. It's a heart murmur.
Gotcha.
Um, and so that has a specific sound. And then obviously everything else, they did all kinds of imaging and that kind of thing. And that's, when they found the other stuff. She just had so many things that were visible, it made them think, oh, wow,
Yeah.
what else
Yeah.
is going on? So then as they were following up with other things and actually diagnosing for something else was,
Pop up.
yes,
Yeah. Well, that's a huge blessing, and they didn't just go, "Oh, well, this is a symptom of something else, so we're
exactly.
not gonna look
Hmm.
at everything."
Yes.
So thank
Uh-huh.
goodness they didn't do that.
Yes.
They didn't do that.
That part of it was she had a really good pediatrician, in the NIC unit, and then she also had a just most wonderful, pediatric endocrinologist who, can you believe this, was on duty that night that she was born, and she specializes in CAH.
Yeah, that's what you were saying in the last episode. So that's a
Yes.
godsend,
Yes,
literally.
absolutely. Yep. She was put there for a reason, so, yeah.
That's huge.
Mhm. Yes.
Well, I'm glad your little itty bitty 9-pound baby is doing amazing.
She is. She is, and she's done wonderful, in school and, you know, just great strides in her career. And, she's just a productive member of society. Of course, I just think she's the greatest thing since peanut butter.
Well, yeah.
But, yeah, it's been a long road. It's, obviously stressful. I attribute every gray hair I have in my head to her, and there's a lot of them. But at the end of the day, obviously, I would take anything for her, and
Mhm.
but, of course, I would wish that she hadn't have had to go through all of
Well,
this.
yes. But I think she's actually really blessed to have a mother like you who would not allow her to use her disabilities as an excuse, because when you start doing that, you're not going to lead a productive life. You're just going to use it as an excuse, and then you're going to end up sitting on the couch eating potato chips the rest of your life, and then
Right,
you're not going to meet the greatest person in the world, which she has. And,
right.
she's going to end up being 400 pounds, which then is going to lead to other issues. And then she's going to be
Uh-huh.
a cat lady. So,
Right.
you know.
Yes. Well, I appreciate that because I definitely pushed her, and, um, I didn't want that to be the case. I wanted her to get as much as she could out of life and happiness and
And I
and
think
all
she
of those
has. She's
things.
got what, like three
Yeah,
PhDs or something? Just a little bit of a smarty smarts? Just a little.
she's a smarty pants, that is for sure.
Owns her
So,
own company, business, and
yes,
is doing amazing and just a great, great person.
yes, she definitely is all those things, and
So,
there's just want people to know that when it seems so hard and you feel like everything's against you, and every time you
mhm.
turn around something else comes up, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. and
Mhm.
a place for you to just kind of exhale and go, man, we made it through that one, you know?
Yep.
And sometimes
Yep.
it's a long time before you can say that, um, but things can always be worse.
Yep. Absolutely.
We have to
So,
thank every day for the great blessings that we have, and just move forward, keep on keeping
right.
on.
Yep. And your
So
family is definitely proof of that, and I think that they're just, and let me say this, I've never personally met your family, but I definitely feel like they're mine, and I love them, and I'm auntie, and I will always be auntie, and I think they're great, and you did a great job all by your little lonesome. So,
oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
good
Well,
job.
I know your family, and that goes both ways. I love your babies as well. So, all right. Well, I guess we'll wrap her up then. And
Alrighty.
just a reminder: don't forget to join in next Tuesday night for our part 3 of what we've been talking about our babies, and it'll be May's turn to have a go and tell us all about her sweet baby. And then don't forget Friday night, free for alls. Oh, are you going to love this one? We are going to talk some celebrity gossip.
Woohoo!
7 p.m. Central. Don't forget us. Have a good rest of your weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday.
Bye.